And as promised, today our guest on Brookline Interactive Group is Ewana Lindo Smith, and she is the Community Development Administrator for the town of Brookline. And that sounds awesome, but nobody has any idea what any of that means. We're going to find out. So, Ewana, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to start like just learning a little bit about you. Tell us, Ewana, what you've been doing your whole life. How did you get here?
Well, I started working for the town of Brookline, actually in the comptroller's office back in '85. So that's quite a long time. And I had, in the meantime, I went to school and I have a bachelor's degree in business administration. They needed in the community development, I got there because I needed part-time work at the time because I had children, had to take care of them. So I started working for the CDBG program back in 2000 because they needed a part-time person to do the financials for it. After that, I worked in a part-time capacity for quite a few years. And then I worked alongside the CDBG administrator at the time. And so I was involved in much of the work that went on. I was also, I've taken, they do offer, there's an organization that we have, it's called the National Community Development Association. They are one of our organizations in Washington that helps to fight to keep the funds coming to us. However, they have courses that they offer to teach you so you can better understand what community development block grant is all about, so you can better run the program. I took that course, which was great. However, as time went on, I did that, and then I matriculated to full-time work, and then the administrator left, and here I am in the administrator's position at this time.
So you're administering CDBGs or community development block grants, and hey, everybody loves to receive grants, but what are CDBGs? How do they work? Where do they come from? Give us some sense for, in general, exactly what's the story with CDBG money?
Well, CDBG funding, it's a federal grant. That's the first thing. And it is administered through the Housing and Urban Development fraction of the federal government. It's a grant that every year it has to be voted on through the House and the Senate. And it's not a standalone. I think it goes with there's a bill they call the T-HUD bill that it's attached to. So they vote on that. And from year to year, it changes. As time goes on, we used to many years ago, get about 2 million, but as time goes on now, we're down to about 1.3 each year. It's on a yearly basis. However, this is awarded, they go through a process of, they call this entitlements, and there are many entitlements in the US, over 1,200. And so whatever funding that the federal government would hand out, that would be divided among the cities and towns. We don't compete for that. We don't apply for it because we're an entitlement, we do get it. However, when it gets to our level, then we have a slightly different process for that.
So the federal government decides how much money is going to Brookline, or maybe it's a bigger process?
It's a bigger pot.
So it's a big pot. How is it determined how much money Brookline gets out of that pot?
Well, it depends on what they do. There's a formula that was calculated many years ago that when the housing development, urban housing development housing, when they get that money, they have a formula that applies to each community, and that formula is used to calculate how much each community gets. It's not one, like each community gets $10,000. Different communities get different amounts. Some bigger communities may get more. Sometimes smaller communities get more. It all depends on, there are few factors involved, depends on the housing stock, how old they are. And depending on, because it all hangs also on the census, when the census is done. So all that is taken into consideration when they divvy the money up to each city and town there is.
So are the CDBG grants associated with housing authority properties or?
No, they're different. The housing authority, they fall under housing, but under a different section than CDBG. CDBG funds can fund some of housing authorities' properties, but they're not under the same.
I see. And you said the town gets something like $1.3 million. That's each year?
Each year, yes. Sometimes that can change depending on how many, because sometimes other cities and towns who may not have been in the pot the year before, they may have joined because they would have requested to become entitlements and they're eligible for it. So they would, so the more we would get if they allotted it, actually last year they allotted 3.5 billion, but that goes for 1,200 communities. If they have another 20 added to that, it will be the same 3.5 going for 1,220 communities. The money doesn't change because the amount of communities are added. It's the same money that they've allotted. It's split among, it doesn't matter how many. So
Now,
that
certainly
changes.
there are more than 1,200 communities in the country, which means that some communities are either not eligible or not applying.
Right.
Can you characterize the kinds of communities who are entitled? Like, do they tend to be urban communities or communities with particular needs? How do we know which communities are likely to be eligible for CDBG money and which ones are not?
The communities usually that are eligible for this, usually there is some form of, it could be like if you have really very old housing, if there's a lot of old housing, they need a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of low to moderate income folks living in these communities. Then these are the communities, usually if you're, not that if you're an affluent community, you don't get funding also, because there are the factors that there are low to moderate income people living. When they do the census tract, they'll see. So these are factors that make you eligible for CDBG funding to your city.
So I'm sure that there are some parameters on how a community can spend that money. Unfortunately, we can't just give bonuses to our
No.
staff employees, right? Ewana's going home with a check.
That would be lovely, but no.
Give us some sense for what are the kinds of things more generally that communities can do with CDBG funding.
Okay. What we have done actually in Brookline, what we have done with the Community Development Block Grant, some cities and towns have a whole lot more need, I would say a lot more to do. If you have slum and blight areas that are really in disarray, if, they would use money for that. Brookline, however, we've been using a lot of the funding to help the BHA state properties, to repair them. We've done playgrounds. We can repair playgrounds in areas that are predominantly low to moderate income folks. We do public facilities. For instance, the Brookline Community Center for Mental Health, they had needed some work done. We were able to do that. We take care of senior centers. We can do work in the senior centers. We provide this a sector of it that's called public services, that what we do there is we help social service nonprofit organizations. They may be running programs relating to, we had a program like at BHA that had taught people, helped people with their resumes, to write their resumes, to get them back into the workforce. We had an English as a second language that the BHA had, and that's a program that we helped. We helped programs with children. You may need some kind of services, healthcare services. With the Brookline Community Mental Health, we have supported programs like those. There's a wonderful training program that happens with Steps to Success. These are kids that are like after high school for the summer, or they could be in 10th or 11th or 12th grade high school. At the summertime, they offer job training for these kids. So that's one of the things we do support, which a lot of communities do the same. We do have some economic development, which we do help with micro-enterprising for businesses with less than 5 employees that do need some help. We also, if there are parks that needs to be done, we in areas that are income eligible. It's not just any area, it has to be predominantly used. One of the requirements is that for CDBG funding, it's that it needs to be serving at least 51% low to moderate income folks. And that's how the program you're running, it needs to be at least, you need to be serving at least 51% low to moderate income folks.
So that means that maybe you have, depending on the use, you have maps that say, okay, for a park,
Yes.
it would make sense in this part of town, but maybe not this other part of town. Or, for a program with helping resumes, we're going to make sure that we're offering it to people who meet or are likely to meet such and such a criterion. $1.3 million goes quick when you're spending it on good things. And I'm sure it must be the case that there's more than $1.3 million worth of good ideas in any given year to spend the money. And that means that somebody, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else, is sort of saying yes to this, or maybe not no, but not yet to this other thing. How does the process of determining which ideas are priorities to fund this year or a future year, how does that work?
Okay, there's one thing I forgot to tell you that was most important, is that we do quite a bit of our money goes to affordable housing when they're creating affordable housing for, because for low to moderate income folks. We do provide money for that. Now, the process of awarding these funds, it's in about December of each year, which sometimes we do know exactly what our allocation is going to be. Sometimes we don't, but we go on the premise that we're going to get about the same amount. So what we do, we put an ad in the paper, and we send out emails to folks that we know, nonprofits, to say that the application process is starting. Each nonprofit has to apply for these funds. We do have the application. We post that on our website, on the Town of Brookline Planning and Community Development website, CDBG. That application, you have to get that back to us in January. And then myself and a couple of my colleagues would go over these applications. Then we give them we have an advisory board. And that advisory board is pretty much made up of someone from the school committee, a select board member, someone from the BHA, and oh dear, I forgot the other person, but there are 5 people, I'm sorry, that are on the board. And they're the ones now, they go over the applications, they go over them, and then they are working on behalf of the select board, because the select board has the final say so. So they would meet in about February, sometime in February, towards the end, early March. And they would then, we would have two public meetings. We tend to have two public meetings that each person who applied is able to come and tell us exactly what their program is and how all these funds would help. Part of the requirement for the program also is that we do like that whenever someone comes to ask for money, they do have some other funding and we're just helping rather than totally paying for a program. So after the board will sit down, they go over everything and they will read everything with a fine tooth comb, and that's how they decide, because it also coincides with a plan. We write a plan each year. Each 5 years, we do a consolidated plan, and that plan is what sets out what we are going to be doing for the next 5 years. So each time we get applications, it needs to fall within those plans. As long as it does, and we have gone over it, myself and a couple of my colleagues have gone through them. We give them to the advisory board, then they go through them, then we decide, then the folks make their plea, what it is that they need. Then the board will then go over it, and if it falls within the plan, and if the money is there, and if it's an urgent need or something that is we really have to fund, then that's how they make their decision. Then as long as they're eligible, because that's why we, the staff, go over it, because if something's not eligible, then there's no point in deliberating it, because CDBG funds cannot fund it. And then it goes to the select board. After all is said and done, we write an annual plan for HUD, and then we go to the select board for a hearing. And then if they decide that there's something they don't want to fund, they have that right. So far, they haven't done it, but they do have that right to. And then it goes, then we send the application off to HUD. And if it coincides with the plan we had already made, then they go ahead and okay that and give us funding for the next year, which starts in July.
Now, the timing aligns with the federal fiscal budget, but also aligns with the town fiscal budget. Does town meeting ultimately vote on these expenditures, or is it separate from the town meeting process?
It's separate from the town meeting process. It's separate from the town meeting process.
So town meeting spends most money, but not this money, as it turns out.
Yes,
Got it.
Pretty much.
How did your processes or your priorities change under COVID? I presume you didn't include COVID in your last 5-year plan, saying we're going to get COVID in 3 years, so we're going to plan for it. You probably didn't do that. If you did, you deserve a raise and a promotion. You might deserve a raise and a promotion anyway, but you certainly would if you forecasted COVID. So how did you incorporate COVID into both your process, but also your decision-making and your prioritization?
Okay, this is what happened. We got a separate pot of money for COVID, which was about the same that we got for allocation, but they gave it to us in two sections, in two different allocations. So what happened is COVID happens and we're all getting frantic. Everybody needs money. We got to get it to them. So HUD allowed us to what we needed to do, because we can amend our plans. So when we realized that this is what's happening, HUD allowed us to amend our plan, or annual plan that we wrote, and the consolidated plan to incorporate taking care of COVID, because we started getting phone calls that, the food bank needed money, safety net needed money, this one needed money, and, and the housing authority needed money. And so what we had to do, myself and my coworker we called and spoke with the various organizations and nonprofit organizations. And, this is how instead of putting it out an ad in the paper, waiting and all that, we had to make phone calls. Then they sent us a letter to, tell us what their need were. Then we went over that and then made recommendations to the select board, because they were also calling the select board and they were calling us, what's going on. So then we made that recommendation to them, and that from there, the money got allocated. One great thing that HUD did for us is normally we have to advertise each plan and pretty much everything for 30 days. So what HUD did was give us a waiver to be able to just advertise for 5 days instead of 30 days. And we always do have it up on our website if someone wants to take a look at whatever the plan is or what we need them to, okay, that's how we usually do it. So that was one of the great things that HUD did. The rules didn't change a lot in terms of what, well, I shouldn't say that. In public services, normally, for the public services part of the grant, you can only spend 15% of what the grant is. So a 1.3 grant, you can only spend 200,000 on the public services. So those are like the social services programs that we can only spend that on there. However, COVID gave us leeway of we could exceed that 15%. And so we were able to help more. And we did help the food bank quite a bit, and we helped Safety Net, those programs quite a bit. And those were primarily to social public services program. So, COVID gave us just a little bit of leeway, but we're able to help more people. And I'm telling you, quite a few people are very grateful for what we could do for them.
That's great to hear. I know that the COVID response has been all hands on deck, many different programs, and all of that support was needed and then some.
Right.
What do you think we have in our future for CDBG? Hopefully COVID is sort of on its way out. What are we thinking? What are some things we should keep our eyes on for maybe some new expenditures or new ways to do things? What are the playgrounds or other projects we should be looking out for in the future?
Well, at this time, right now, we're trying to work on as much affordable housing as we can. I can't go into complete detail because that the housing division, I just have top knowledge of it, that we're just trying to work on providing a lot of more affordable housing for people, because that's the biggest cry we have in terms of what can we do to help what's going on right now. So I think that's where we're trying to focus. We're working on a housing production plan right now to see how we can really get that done. And that's primarily what we're working on. We'll always do this, the public services, because that's 15% of the budget. We wouldn't take that away from them by any means. I don't know if we'll get new nonprofits applying. That we don't know, but we've had pretty much, the same for over a long period of time, folks that apply at all times. So I'm not, we're trying to get the word out about CDBG. So if, other folks needed to apply or so forth, then, would be available. But at this time, it's just right now we're working on a lot of trying to get more affordable housing for people, because that's the loudest cry you hear every time we do a survey or whatever else. It's a matter of getting more housing. People need a place to live. In my eyes, I'm hoping that we can see some more job training for people also, because that's one story to provide the house, but it's another to kind of help people to be able to help themselves. Because, as the saying goes, you teach somebody to fish, then you're good to go. But when you keep fishing for them, then, there's a block there. We can't go any further. So I'm hoping, and that's something we can also do. So I guess in time, we'll be looking into seeing how we can, get more training programs running.
And to put it in context for folks, in Brookline, in Massachusetts, the cost of constructing a single unit of subsidized housing is about $500,000. And so when you take the 1.3 million, you take out 200,000 for the sort of social services you described. If all of the rest of the money goes towards housing, then the CDBG can create an incremental 2 housing units per year. Right now, that money will be linked with lots of other money and sort of pooled in. But ultimately, every dollar can only be spent once. And so, I will tell you that personally, I'm thrilled that we're really pushing at a lot of different levels to
Mhm.
add to our inventory of subsidized housing. But I think it's really important for people to keep in context that even subsidized housing costs an awful lot to build. And so, because we are resource limited, even if we invest a lot of our budgets into subsidized housing, it is not going to create hundreds and hundreds of units within a
Nope.
year. It's a very sort of slow process. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. On the contrary, that means we should do it even more so we can kind of ramp up a little faster. But that's just for context. Ewana, thank you so much for coming on Brookline Interactive Group and explaining CDBG, the Community Development Block Grants, and how Brookline allocates. I'm grateful that we've got you doing this work. We've got we have an obligation to spend the money well, consistent with the program, but also consistent with our values. And I'm
Right.
delighted to know that you're doing just that on behalf of the town of Brookline. So thanks for coming on the show. Folks at home, thanks for watching Brookline Interactive Group. I'm Tommy Vitolo. We've just been chatting with Ewana Lindo Smith from the town of Brookline, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.
Okay, thank you.